All right, welcome to this episode of Monetizing Your Mental Capital. I am your host, Will Christensen. I am super excited. I have Tyler Gregg here from Amped. Tyler was kitty corner from us last year at Prosper Show. We're going to go to Prosper Show again. We were just talking about how, in less than a month from the time of the recording of this show, we're going to be at Prosper and hanging out. It's going to be a good time, I think.
Yeah, well, excited to be on here. Looking forward to seeing you live and in person down at Prosper. Been going like 3 or 4 years now, and it just keeps getting here every year. Changes every year as well. So excited to see what it looks like this year.
Yeah, I know one of the council members. They have like a council of people who choose the speakers, and man, they are going through the ringer in terms of making things better and trying to upgrade the speakers and just push into all of that. So I've been impressed with the efforts, and I'm excited to see how the turnout goes and above.
Yeah. Be good to get back into Vegas too, right?
Oh, of course, right? Like, why wouldn't we? Funny, because I was just there back in January at another trade show, and I was like, man, this place is crazy. So, all right, well, diving in here, Tyler, why would someone want to listen to you when it comes to monetizing your mental capital? What is it about Tyler Gregg and his journey that makes you someone who, I don't know, has done some of this before or looked into the idea of building a career around mental capital?
Sure. When I think about kind of that concept of mental capital, I think a lot of it comes down to entrepreneurship and always looking for, something to sell, right? And when you're an entrepreneur, like you need to find ways to, bring value to the table. It's something I've done throughout my career. When I first got into the working world, I vividly remember sitting in an interview for kind of your typical entry-level job coming out of college many years ago, and just sitting there going, man, this is just going to be a repetitive job. Every day is going to look the same. I was like, man, that just can't be what work life is like, right? And ended up turning down that job and trying to figure out entrepreneurship on my own, and ended up getting into consulting, which when you're in the consulting world, you're constantly looking for new clients, right? And you're constantly engaging in conversations and trying to find the angle that you're able to bring value to the table and, of course, get paid for. And then once you start getting paid for, you're constantly trying to find a way to make sure that they keep paying you month over month, right? After the initial engagement's done. So just a lot of experience throughout my years of kind of starting in that consulting world, then moving into Metric Story, which was what our company did before we rebranded to AMP, and just constantly all along the way looking for ways to create value and monetize that value. It's one thing to just do stuff for fun, right? But at the end of the day, you got to make sure that you're monetizing it so that you can keep the lights on and hire a team around you.
Beautiful. So started out in the consulting world, shifted over and decided to go into, it sounds like metrics and SaaS. And we're going to get into that a little bit. Tell me, what was that like? What did you decide to consult in at the beginning?
Yeah. So I was working in management consulting, specifically like VP of sales for hire. The company's called Altus Alliance, Seattle firm here. They do really great things for mainly tech focused companies that aren't quite big enough to have a VP of sales. So those companies would engage with Altus Alliance and hire one of their partners to be a interim VP of sales. So anywhere between 10 to 30 hours a week of consulting. Obviously, at those stages, they're not quite ready. They don't have enough foundation to just go hire a full-time VP of sales. And so I worked with Altus and kind of worked with a couple of their partners. We brought on to different clients to kind of figure out their sales process, figure out operationally what they needed to put in place. And then from there, I actually ended up meeting the founders of Metric Story, who they had just come out of an incubator program called Techstars. And I found them because I saw them coming out, figured they probably needed some help, kind of building the company. And at the time, they really only had like a concept. They didn't have a product yet. So I ended up just kind of making friends with the two founders for about a year, just kind of staying in touch with them, doing some kind of side projects over the course of that year. As the product kind of got a little bit further along, I was able to join them as the first business employee, but they had a couple engineers already in place building the product. From there, We built that product up, that company up to a pretty good spot, but then COVID hit. And as COVID hit, we're sitting there going, okay, we have a lot of ideas as like a team.
Mm-hmm.
We have a product pre-COVID, but COVID threw a lot of kinks into e-commerce at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just kind of got around, and one of our founders had the idea of, why don't we send Google ads to the best converting website in the world, which is Amazon? And we were the first company to really start doing that at scale through a technology platform. And of course, figured out a way to monetize it, right? And that happened all around 2020, 2021. And since then, we rebranded to Amped and really been on I don't want to say rocket ship because it's a little bit of a cliche, but a really fun journey and a lot of growth over the last couple of years.
Interesting. And did you just start applying for random jobs? Is that how you ran into the sales, like hired gun? In today's world, I hear them often call it a fractional, right? Like a fractional VP of sales. How did you get in? How did you find that?
I don't know how people randomly get jobs of like cold applying, right? Like I've only ever had success of like networking, right?
Me too.
Having conversations with people, having a good, interesting conversation with one person who connects you to another, just eventually through good, genuine conversations, you can find good opportunities for your skill set. And that's what happened for me as I got into the consulting world. Is networking is a little bit of a dirty word because I think it can come across as ill-intentioned, right? To me, it's like genuine conversations that you have with people that share common interests. That's how I got into it.
Beautiful. And as you got in there and began to see that, what would you say is the main skill that you learned there that kind of became monetizable?
Yeah. It was a long time ago, but it sticks with me because I think it's a skill that remains and it's always prevalent. It's just problem solving, right? Everyone has problems, right? Everyone has different problems. But if you can tackle those problems in a systematic way, you can probably provide value to pretty much everyone in the world, right? If you can creatively solve problems. So that's the skill set that I think really sticks out and something that I think is relevant no matter what industry or career path you're in.
Okay. So let's say that I'm an e-commerce seller and I'm in the middle of, my e-commerce career and I'm looking to monetize some of my mental capital. I've learned some of the problem solving skills, some of those other pieces, and I'm now looking to kind of branch out and go take one of these skills that I've learned and turn it into a productized service or an infomercial or a course that I could sell. What should I be looking for around skills that I can monetize? What would you say if you're trying to identify which piece of your mental capital is actually valuable and could be capitalized? What would you say would be the way that you'd identify that?
Meaning, if you're an e-commerce seller and you're looking to expand beyond just selling in e-commerce and kind of looking for kind of creating a side gig or
diversifying my portfolio, right? I'm looking to break out of the physical product and try to go after some of that mental product. It's interesting how often I talk to e-commerce sellers and they're like, oh, a SaaS company, that would just be so awesome. And I have to remind them often, like, there are lots of things about a SaaS company that are just not fun. I mean, that's true of every business type. But I'm curious, what would you tell that e-commerce seller who is looking to, break out and find new opportunities?
I'm not sure if it's like a specific skill set or specific problem, but something that I put all of our ideas through from like a product building perspective is we call it the mom test. It's actually a book called The Mom Test. And the whole premise of it is if you ask your mom something, she's always going to be encouraging. She's always going to say, oh, that's a great idea. You should go for it. Right. And people are generally like that, right? If you throw an idea past a friend, your friend's probably not going to sit there and say, that's a horrible idea. Like, don't do that. They're just going to be encouraging. And what that can do is that can put you down a path where you put a lot of time, a lot of resources into something. And it turns out people were just sugarcoating it and being nice to you. So the mom test, we use it all the time whenever we roll out new features or think about a new idea that we want to monetize. And it's asking very pointed questions to try to get the actual truth out of what someone is, because they're always going to defer to trying to be nice and no one wants to shoot down your ideas. Right. And so you have to get to the bottom of it before you actually start taking that leap of faith. And that's not trying to be like a negative Nancy of like, don't do it. It's just, you need to make sure you're asking the right questions before you decide to commit a ton of resources or a ton of time testing the market for that new thing you want to monetize.
So if I'm in that stage of wanting to test the market, what are some of the questions that I should be asking?
Yeah, open-ended questions always, because you want to try to sift through or parse through the bias in people's answers. And when you actually sit down and you think about the questions that you ask people, they're layered with biases, and you're kind of leading people towards the answers that you want to hear. So when you go through that process, it's got to be open-ended questions. And we always write down 10 to 15 questions, and we just think through it. Like, is there any bias in this? Am I leading? Is it a leading question? Right. And then we ask those 10 questions to customers, to people that are in the industry that we're looking to explore, potential customers. And then the other thing that we look for is trying to get some sort of commitment, right? Like, not like, how much would you pay for this type of questions, but sign up for a wait list. Would you prioritize this, right? And you're trying to get some sort of commitment to understand, is this real, or are they just kind of sugarcoating it and being nice?
Yeah. Right now, I'm head of marketing at Seller Labs. And the reason they brought me in is because I'm a go-to-market specialist. I love taking things that have never been sold before and helping people figure out how to actually get that into the hands of people who will buy it. And one of the things I always tell people is, like, you didn't ask them to open their wallet, you know nothing. Like, if you did not ask for even $1, right? Like, would you pay me $1 for this? It's amazing how often just that question, if I had this built today, can I have $1 out of your wallet?
Yeah.
It's just interesting how quickly that goes from an encouraging conversation to, like, no, you can't have my $1. My favorite commitment is, like, why don't I take your credit card? I'll put it here in my secure system and I'll charge you, but only when this is ready to use. And all of a sudden it gets real, right? Like, oh, what is it that you're building? It's like, wait, were you listening to anything we were just saying?
Yeah. And that's human nature, right? I mean, it's funny when we put things through the mom test. Like, I am guilty of it all the time. When people ask me for idea, you always want to be positive. You always want to be brainstorming. No one wants to be the Debbie Downer, right? And that perfect question. We'll take your credit card. We'll charge you when it's delivered. People are going to probably start giving you the real honest thing, or they're going to start backing out and say, well, not quite, and all that stuff. You got to get some sort of commitment. Like, compliments don't do anything.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Any other ideas around other sorts of commitments beyond, like, a credit card, or what are other ways that you can get some of those sorts of, like, teasing out the real truth? Anything else coming to mind from the book or from your experience?
Yeah. It's concrete commitments, kind of what we just talked about. But the other thing you have to keep an eye out for is false positives. People are going to be enthusiastic, but you need to make sure that you're talking to the right person. For us in the SaaS world and selling into brands, there's a lot of people that work in brands, right? So we can't just talk to anyone that works with the brand. We need to be talking to the decision maker and also the end user. Sometimes it's different people, right? And just because I talked to someone at Nike doesn't mean Nike would pay for it, right? You got to talk to the right person within Nike who's actually going to be using your product and who actually faces the problems that you're trying to solve.
100%. So as you have kind of leaned in on that, let's talk about your journey from Metric Story over to an idea was thrown out. What if we sent Google paid search over to the highest converting website? How did you guys vet that? How did you use the mom test to make sure you were headed the right way?
Yeah. So it first started getting a group of sellers on Amazon to commit to interviews. And the way we did that was through a couple partners that were able to that had access to the end users. And then, of course, giving people $50 gift cards, $100 gift cards to actually talk to us. It was really important for us to do it that way, because if you try to reach out to a brand under the premise of, hey, I've got this idea, I want to see if you're up for it, like, it can very quickly get into a sales call, right? If you tell someone, hey, here's what we're going to do, here's why we're going to do it, and then I've got some questions, they're already biased by the prelude that you just gave them. So you have to immediately start the interview, the meeting, with your 10 to 15 questions without any bias, without any idea of like where this is going. right? So if we'd gone on and said, hey, we're going to do Google Ads to Amazon with attribution, the goal is to create a ton of revenue. It's going to be really profitable, all this stuff. And then you go into their questions, they're going to be biased by everything you said. So in order to get people to give us their time without us giving them any hints into what we're trying to learn, you have to do payments, right? $50, $100 gift cards to people that are interested in being first movers for a product and a product adoption. And so that's how we did it.
So how do you open the discussion? If you can't sell them because you're trying not to sell them, right? You're trying to remove the bias, hey, I have this product that we might build and we want feedback. We'll pay you $50 to jump on a call kind of thing.
It's difficult. So you have to give them enough so that they know generally what it is. But what we did was we got our partners to kind of do some messaging for us to kind of put us in front of the right people. And messaging was along the lines of, hey, we'll give you a $100 Amazon gift card. We're exploring a product to help Amazon sellers extend their marketing mix. It's kind of all we're going to tell you, but $100 and all we're going to take is 30 minutes of your time. And what's interesting is when you do that, you get a few different types of people that you need to kind of be aware of. Some people will just do it for the money and they'll get on, just kind of give very straightforward answers. And that is what it is. Not super helpful. The other side of it is you get people that are super excited. They're first movers. They're creative people themselves. They're excited about the new thing. So then they get on and they're overly enthusiastic. And it's like, oh, that's a great idea. And what about this? And what about this? And they start brainstorming with you, which is a disaster as well, because now you're working with enthusiastic people, but you're going to get a lot of nice to haves and not like core what is actually needed when you build a product. So you have to kind of be aware of the personality types that respond to these kind of surveys and these kind of outreach. And to do it right, you need to get a big enough audience so that, when it's all said and done, 25% are going to be the enthusiastic people, which are valuable. You just have to take with a grain of salt. The other 25% is going to be people that they're just there for the gift card, probably not getting much out of that. And then there's that middle group of 50% that's giving you really, really good stuff. So you have to have a big enough audience to really learn a lot. And it takes time. And the hardest part is you are going to be excited about your idea and you're going to want it to work. So you have to be conscious of that bias and how you interpret the findings.
If I'm an e-commerce seller and I've got this SaaS idea or I've got this course idea and I'm surveying my fellow Amazon sellers and I've been good about like not creating bias, right? Like I've reached out, I've got them on their game to come on. I want to know if I don't have $100 to pay per interview, have you got any other ideas for things that I can do for that? Let's imagine that I am paying for them. How many do I need to do in order to get that sample size to be like, okay, yeah.
That's the $1 million question, right? If you're going to really do the due diligence, it's got to be a lot. I think when we did it, we ended up getting about 50 into our interview process, which took a long time, but it was worth doing that time to make sure it was a fully vetted idea that we're going to pivot our company into this space. We had to make sure that we were very, very solid in what we were pivoting into. If it's like a course or something that's not going to be a huge kind of upfront cost or a huge risk, if it ends up not working, you can probably do less than 50, right? 10 or 15 is probably going to get you there. So I think the number depends on how big of an idea or how much you're going to commit to it. How risky it is.
Okay. So let's say that I'm an Amazon seller and my business is doing well, but I really like $100 a pop for 50 people. I mean, you're talking about $5,000 here. Have you ever done something other than money to invite these individuals on without creating bias?
You got to barter something, right? So it doesn't have to necessarily be a gift card or cash or anything. You're really good at PPC, or you're really good at SEO, or you're really good at inventory management or something like that. You could offer that as like hey, I'll give you a free hour of consulting or a free audit or a free whatever business plan or something like that. And that can also work.
Okay. Like as long as it's not too related to what it was that you're trying to get feedback on, right?
Yeah. That part I wouldn't worry too much about, right? Okay. Like if your expert is ranking on Amazon and you're going to do a course on ranking. That's your expertise, right? And so you could probably still offer ranking advice or ranking guidance without biasing too much of this product or the course that you're going to do. Yes, you have to be conscious of it for sure, but there's ways to kind of differentiate them, because at the end of the day, you're selling your expertise, right? So
that's nice because you can sell the thing that's related and buy their time in exchange for your time, and you'll end up doing 50 hours of free consulting, but that may be easier to come by than $5,000.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Exactly. In your journey of creating a tool that would do what AMP does, what have been some of the biggest hurdles in monetizing that mental capital?
Biggest hurdles. There's lots of hurdles. Feels like every day there's a hurdle you got to navigate. There's always that tug and pull of selling, but not overselling, right? And you want to be able to really set expectations with your audience before they actually start paying for your product or your service. And as an entrepreneur, you're always excited. You want to work with everyone, right? And you want everyone to be in it. But in the end of the day, should everyone be going through your course, or should everyone be using your product? Probably not. Like, if your product's that broad, probably isn't going to be that great of a product, right? So I think that's kind of like the biggest hurdle that we've had, is wanting to help everyone, but figuring out who we can actually help the best. I think that's kind of the entrepreneur's dilemma, because you're excited about what you're doing and you think it can help everyone and you want to help everyone. But at the end of the day, if you're really building a good product or good course, it should have a very specific audience that you're trying to help and that you can help effectively.
So I have that problem where I've got this idea and I'm like, but it could change everything for everyone. I built a company called Data Automation, and they do boutique integrations between different systems. And I'm totally guilty of building all sorts of stuff for all sorts of different people. We built some cool stuff that we lost a fair amount of money on at the beginning of Data Automation's journey. What can you do if you've never had to niche down, another term that I've heard used for deciding to choose a smaller group of people, narrowing my audience? What can I do to fight that urge to do everything for everyone?
The shiny objects, right? I think it's just having good kind of systems and filters in place to filter ideas and feature requests and concepts into nice to have stuff and need to have stuff. I'm relating this a little bit probably back to our product, but we get asked all the time in our in-app chat. People always message us saying, hey, can you do this? Can you add this? Can you add this feature? Can you add this data? Can you add this? And we want to help them all. We want to do it. It sounds exciting. It sounds great. But just having a really good filter in place to first off understand kind of a binary. Is that nice to have, or is that like mission critical? And then once you do that, there's a lot of nice to have stuff. And not to say like you shouldn't do nice to have stuff. Like any good product does have easy to use, convenient feature sets, right? But at the end of the day, you can only build so much, right? So first off, putting through that kind of more binary filter. And then once you have that list that's always growing of mission critical stuff, then it's just another filter of, biggest priorities, what's going to move the needle the most, what's going to either generate more customers, right? Or improve retention rates, right? And that's for us, like the big thing, right? Like those are the two money makers for us. Longer lifetime value of a current customer and new customers, right? That's kind of how you make money. So you got to put it through that lens. And I think those two filters are hard to set up because you're always going to have that pull to want to do it. But if you can really sort out the mission critical stuff, it saves a ton of time and a ton of wasted resources as we've learned.
Obviously, just asking the individual, going back to the mom test, is that feature you're asking for really mission critical? Like if I just ask them that, they're going to be like, of course it's mission critical. Why else would I be asking you, right?
Yeah.
What sorts of questions can I ask to identify the mission critical versus the nice to haves?
It's got to be open-ended. So someone asks for a feature request, the immediate response has to be, okay, what would that allow you to do? And then they're going to go off on a long thing of what it would allow them to do. And then from there, like you do have to interpret it, right? Like they're not giving you direct product roadmap. it is a skill to be able to interpret it, but it all starts with asking those open-ended questions. And what would that enable you to do is such a powerful question to respond to a feature request with, because it's not biased, it's not leading, just puts it back into their court. We get it all the time. And it's hilarious the answers that you get. Sometimes they'll wind down after their monologue and say, actually, now that I think about it, yeah, maybe I don't need that. Being able to actually verbally process is such an important part into the learning.
Interesting. What would that allow you or enable you to do? Good question. Another question popped into my head earlier and I almost forgot it. So I totally get it in terms of narrowing it down to the mission critical in terms of the features. And that's very important. How do I narrow down the people? How do I decide this group of people does not get blessed by my product? This group of people, they get blessed by my product.
Yeah, I think the only way that we've really been able to figure it out is open up the floodgates and then close the floodgates and have kind of off ramps, right? And you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't test, it's going to be really hard to be accurate with who is this for. Proof of concepts, short-term engagements, not locking people into a year contract, those kind of things help in that process, because you don't want to lock someone in for a year contract. And if you know it's going to be successful or not successful or appropriate or not appropriate for them, if you know that in the first 90 days, then why are you locking them in for a year if you don't even know if it's right for them, right? And so I think kind of having floodgates open, but then easy off ramps to where if it's not a fit for them, making sure that everyone's walking away feeling okay about it, right? Other than that, if you're doing something new, if you're doing something that no one's ever done before, you're never going to know who it's for right off the bat. You might have some indications if you've done the mom test properly and you've done your customer interviews, but you're not going to know for sure. I'm a firm believer in having the floodgates be open with those off ramps kind of established to make sure that no one feels slighted or tricked or anything like that.
So you mentioned one off ramp, which is a smaller contract, right? Like a month-to-month contract or some sort of easy way to exit. What are some other easy off ramps that you can put into your cycle so that, as these people come in, you can say, yeah, it's probably not the right fit for me?
It depends on the product or the service. The easiest one, when you think about a product thing, we don't do this very often. It's easy for me to say it's a great idea, even though we don't do it. But product-led growth to where it's free to use for a certain point. And then once you kind of hit that point, then you start being charged. That's a really great way. You see software companies use that all the time with kind of a freemium feature set. If you think about now, of course, I'm not going to think of one off.
Canva's like that. Gmail, you are the product with Gmail, but Canva's a great example of one where lots of value in the free product and they're constantly trying to upsell.
Yep.
Zapier, there are so many that do the freemium model.
Think about Google Photos, right? You get a ton of storage space. And then once you have enough space in there, once you have enough photos
you're
in there,
paying for Google storage.
Exactly. So that's a really good way to do it, but it's not the appropriate way to do it for all products or all services, right? Especially consulting. You can't give someone hours of your time for free. So definitely not appropriate there to some extent. If you really feel though that that person is someone you should work with and you should consult with, and you think it's going to be a great long-term fit, work for a few weeks to prove your worth. And if you prove your worth to them, then they'll start paying you. So there's obviously risk with that. But if you think the upside's worth the give at the beginning, that's definitely a good way to do it.
If you're going to work for free for somebody, my recommendation would be set expectations super clearly. Be like, all right, I will give you 10 hours for free. And then track those 10 hours and let them know when they're out, right? Leaving it open-ended leaves yourself in a really interesting situation because a lot of times people value what they pay for. And so you'll find yourself in that never-ending trap. Any other easy off-ramps that you would recommend? And let's go with this consulting route. If I'm consulting, what's an easy off-ramp I can use for consulting? Because I've opened the floodgates. I'm going to consult for everyone. What's an easy way to exit the relationship that doesn't burn everybody?
Yeah, probably to what you just said there is just upfront expectations. We don't know how this engagement is going to work. We don't know exactly what we're going to learn as we start working with each other. The goal is X, but let's have checkpoints along the way kind of thing. That's not like necessarily an off ramp, I would say, but it is clear expectation setting and over communication, right?
It almost sounds like a guarantee, right?
In some ways, I guess.
Like, I'll give you your money back, essentially. Like, when you were describing that, my brain went to guarantee, right? Like, we think that this consulting will result in X, Y, and Z, and we're going to reduce your risk by guaranteeing if we don't get at least 3 leads as a result of this consulting, I'm going to give you your money back, that's an off-ramp, right? Like, that's a way that everybody feels good about diving in and diving out.
Yeah, that's definitely one way. I was thinking more around just over communication, right? To where as you start getting in business with anyone, right? Like if you're over communicating throughout the entire process and you're being authentic in your communication, that's going to go a long way. If you have pretense or you're hiding some stuff or you're kind of not sharing everything, that's when things are going to get dicey in the consulting world.
How do you stick to your guns when floodgates are now closed? You got the off-ramps coming in, but there's someone new coming in and they just need help. What do you do in that situation? How do you stick to your guns and just say, look, we're just not a good fit for you? What have you told yourself to try to make it through that hard moment?
I think it's probably one of the hardest things that we've had as we've kind of matured as amps in the space that we're at. One way that I've seen it done successfully in businesses is like quality control board, to where the salesperson, the customer success person, the entrepreneur, they don't actually get a say. They can bring it to the table, but then you have a third party person that takes an unbiased look at it and says, yes or no. To have a resource like that is nice, right? Whether it's like a mentor that you can run it by if you're kind of doing consulting, or if you're in more of a SaaS environment. Like a lot of companies will literally have quality control boards that approve all deals that come in. And they can drive salespeople nuts because they can work really hard on deals and then their deal gets turned down, right? It can drive entrepreneur nuts because they want to help everyone. But at the end of the day, it does a pretty good job of making sure that the right customers are coming through the door. That's a great way to do it.
It's a way to do it without emotion, right? Because the entrepreneur really, what he wants to do is help the most people he can. Well, he doesn't realize that helping this person who's not in his niche is going to hamper him from helping everybody else. And so if he goes to somebody who he trusts, a mentor, a friend, sets up a quality control board, calls a couple of entrepreneur friends, like, hey, here's the deal. I'm going to run into situations where I'm going to be my own worst enemy here. And I'm going to want to help people that I shouldn't help. So what I'd like to do is just create a short Loom video describing this deal to you. And if it doesn't line up with this, and this, you veto it. And I'll give you 1% of the company for looking at every single one of the deals or something of that nature. Some way to like bring in a third party to double check your emotional bias, your own emotional bias that you're bringing to the table.
When you bring on the wrong customers or wrong clients, it just sucks for everyone, right? Like you're going to spend a lot of time trying to make it work for them. They're going to leave feeling like your product or your service doesn't work. And they might tell their friends that it doesn't work when in reality, it just wasn't a fit for them. And then they feel bad about it. You feel bad about it because you wasted a ton of time. And a quality control board really works well to alleviate that for sure.
I love it.
And it's getting rid of the bias. It is the hardest thing in the world though, to go back to a prospect and say, hey, we're not going to work with you.
Well, our quality control board said that you're just not a good fit for us. Super hard. Totally agree. Do it with dignity. Lean in, recognize that that's the way businesses grow. Because if you don't, you're going to fail, period.
The best way to do it is to let that person know early on in the conversation that everything goes through quality control.
So there's a possibility that we could do all this work to find a deal that makes sense for us. But we've got a team that has to approve this to make sure it's a perfect fit for all of us.
Guess what happens when you tell someone it's not a fit for them?
How? Why?
They want it even more. Right. So you have to stick to your guns. It's crazy. So you have to avoid using it as a sales tactic too. Don't create a quality control board to trick someone into signing up. Like you got to have it.
Do it authentically.
Yeah.
All right. So we got a couple of questions that we use to wrap up the podcast. And one of them is this. If you could make a phone call back to Tyler right as he's beginning to go work as a fractional VP of sales, and you could tell him one thing that might help him up-level his ability to monetize his mental capital, one thing to do differently. Hey, Tyler, make sure that you never X, Y, or Z, or make sure that you always X, Y, or Z. What would you tell him? What would you tell Tyler right before he's jumping in on his first consulting gigs?
Yeah, probably be the quality control thing that we were just talking about. I mean, and when I look back at the consulting days, the metric story days, Amped early days, just how much time I spent trying to make it work. Yeah.
80-20 rule, right? You make 80% of your money on people that you spend 20% of your time on. Why the heck are you spending 80% of your time on people who are only paying you 20% of the money? It is so common in the space. So 100%. So find a way to introduce quality control into your sales process as early as possible.
Yeah. And what it allows you to do it too, right, is as we're talking about those off ramps, right? Like if you can really nail that ideal customer, then all of a sudden it makes free trials and free proof of concepts a lot easier because your degree of confidence of a month of free, knowing that they're going to be with you for 2 years.
Because they've gone through the quality control, because you understand who that perfect customer is. I love it. All right. So we're going to imagine that you just stepped into an elevator with an 8-figure seller. And he's like, yeah, I'm an 8-figure seller and life's just crazy. So somehow he lets it slip that he's an 8-figure seller. And you got 60 seconds in this elevator to basically tell him about Amped and, some of what's going on there. Right after you answer that question, you're going to give us any tips, tricks, hacks, or books that you've come across. The mom test is one, obviously, you've already told us, but any others, tips, tricks, hacks, or books that you have come across over the past year or so that have helped you upskill your ability to monetize your mental capital. So I'm going to start the timer here, 60 seconds. And then after that, you're going to go into tips, tricks, hacks, or books that you've got. So you got 1 minute. Go.
First off, I would ask what kind of products he sold, get to know who he is. And my favorite question to ask is, what is your favorite product you ever sold? Gets the conversation going. And then hopefully he asks what I do. To which then I would say, yeah, I work at Amped. It's a software as a service that allows Amazon brands to advertise their products on Google Ads, send those customers to their products on Amazon with full keyword level attribution. It's a huge opportunity to expand beyond the walls of Amazon ads and engage your customers as they're going through their buying process. Think the last time you bought a product, you most likely searched Google as you were deciding what to buy. You need to be able to engage your customers during their research and the consideration phase so that when they come to Amazon, they're engaging with your brand, engaging with your product, and you're creating that awareness and convincing them to buy your product.
Nailed it. Whew, man, right under the ringer there. You nailed your 60 seconds. Okay, so Tyler, now any tips, tricks, hacks, or books that you've come across in the past year or so that you felt like, man, this app just blew me away. So helpful. Anything that you've come across?
Starting with books, my favorite book of all time, I always talk about it in interviews like this, is Essentialism. And it works for life. It works for personal side. It works for business. But it's all about trying to prioritize what's essential in your life or in your day and what isn't. And it's pretty crazy when you look at your calendar and it's full of meetings, full of things that need to be done, et cetera. When you actually look at it, there's not that much that's essential, right? It's a lot of fluff that ends up creeping into your calendar. And I try to read it once a year because it kind of resets kind of your mindset and it frees up a ton of time. You spend so much time in meetings and doing stuff that's good. It's like, it's productive and, whatnot. But if you didn't show up to that meeting, would your company still be growing the way that you want it to do? Probably, right? So putting it through that kind of lens of what's essential and what isn't essential so you can prioritize the right stuff and free up a ton of time. Like I read it and the month after reading it every year, I just have so much more time. I'm not working till 8 or 9 at night. I'm working till a reasonable time and the same amount of stuff's actually getting done. So Essentialism is a book I recommend everyone read. You can apply it to personal life as well, for relationships, family, and all that good stuff.
Is that The Disciplined Pursuit of Less by Greg McKeown?
Yep, that is it.
All right. I like it. Any other suggestions? Tips, tricks, hacks, apps, or books?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of apps that I use that are productive. One that I actually started using recently, and it's silly that I wasn't using it before, but it's Google Tasks. I'm on Gmail, and the Google Tasks is a Chrome extension. It shows up right on the right side of your browser on all of your browsers, and just you're in a meeting, you have your calendar pulled up, it's sitting there right there. You go to your Gmail, you go to someone's website that you're about to talk to. It's following you everywhere. So you can leave call notes, you can leave tasks. It's just super, super easy to keep track of like stuff that needs to be done. Again, it's at the end of the day, it's a task, but it's omnipresent because I'm so ingrained with Google stuff.
I love it. That's a good one. I have not used Google Tasks in a long time, so I'm going to have to go back and take a peek at it. Tyler, thank you so much for joining us on Monetizing Your Mental Capital. I'm very excited to share with people a micro version of the mom test, right? To help them understand how to narrow their audience, narrow their features, and really focus on that essentialism side of, making your life better by doing less.
It's crazy. I read it once a year, and for 2 or 3 weeks afterwards, it's just great. And then I revert back to my old ways. So I got to get that part, but it feels good for a few weeks.
Maybe it's like 4 weeks and then 5 weeks and then 6 weeks. I have a feeling if we compared Tyler now versus Tyler 5 years ago, Tyler now probably does less than Tyler 5 years ago, because on a whole, even though it's not in that same kick of like just, nailing it, you're still getting a lot better pull at it all.
Yeah, I would agree. I'd like to think so, at least.
What's the best way for people to reach out?
LinkedIn's a great spot to find me, Tyler Gregg, and then Amped, AMPD. Great way to find me. Feel free to slip into my DMs there. And I try to respond to anyone that messaged me there. I don't post too much on LinkedIn, but I definitely lurk, and I read other people's posts, and I definitely engage in the chat.
Cool. Well, thanks again for joining us. And that's all for now.